Like everybody, we've sort of been involved in forest establishment management harvesting. The ETS, like Anita said, Forestry's been in the ETS right from the start, for better or for worse. So we've been involved in that for a long time, for over 10 years now. We've probably got around, I don't know, 200 or 300 clients involved in a lot of the forest establishment with farmers, other people buying land, planting trees. So we've been in the thick of it really for quite a long time. So what I'm going to cover here today is I'm just going to cover off how forestry fits in, what happens and what the opportunities and what's sort of involved in it. And I'll try and answer a few questions and just bring up a few points that Sarah's asked me to do as well. But I thought I'd just start out very quickly, because I don't know, some people this will be like repeating things, but just to show how does the ETS work, because that's a common question we get. Well, how does this thing work? How does it actually happen? So in here you've got who they call as the emitter. So in New Zealand at the moment, the ETS, it's basically everybody bar agriculture in terms, like Anita said, in emissions. So when you drive your car, buy fuel, buy diesel, anyone's doing that, etc. Embedded in that cost you pay is a carbon charge. Okay, so everyone who's driving their car, driving their truck, machinery on your farm, Genesis, anyone's burning coal, all that coal has got a carbon charge embedded within it. So all those people, we don't actually directly pay it ourselves, the fuel companies, etc., pick it up. So at the moment, they've got to actually, at the end of the year, say, I've emitted X amount of carbon, and they've got to provide NZU. So they've got to buy an offset, and at the moment, in New Zealand, that basically comes from forestry. Some of the industrial processes get a free allocation. Like Fonterra, for example, they'll be responsible for a certain amount, anywhere from 10 to 30% of their emissions for their factories. They have to then go and offset that. They have to buy an offset to do that, and they'll get a free allocation up to that 60 or 90%. So at the moment, that comes basically out of forests. You've got to find eligible forests. They can come to us and buy a credit, and at the end of the year, they surrender that to the government. And next year, when they start emitting more carbon, they have to buy another credit. So it's an annual cycle thing they've got to do. So the government, they've got to surrender it to the government, and the government issues to forests for people who are growing trees that are eligible. They issue as carbon credits. It's all electronic, there's no paper, it's a paperless system. So what you hear things about the carbon price. So a number of years ago, the carbon price was down around $2. When the ETS first started, it was around $18, $20. It crashed. Why did it crash? There was an allowance to bring a lot of units in, cheap units in from the Ukraine and Russia, which turned out to be fraudulent. But so the NZU price you could use these very cheap overseas units for 10 or 20 cents. A lot of pre-90 forest, so on Plantation board, the forest estate between Taupo and Rotorua got deforested, got put into dairy farming. If it had been an NZU price of $25, it would have cost them $15,000, $20,000 a hectare to do it. It cost them nothing. So it basically allowed for probably something like 50 or 70,000 hectares of forest to be removed and converted to dairy farming. Okay, now that door got closed, and that was by international. It got agreed basically internationally this was all fraudulent. And through a whole lot of international negotiations, the New Zealand ETS became a closed scheme. So we don't bring anything in from offshore and we don't export anything out. So what we've got is what we've got. There was also a one-for-one subsidy, so a 50% subsidy. So emitters only had to be liable for 50% of the credits. As of this year, it's 100%. So the subsidy here has, where's my little light? I've got my glasses on. Oh, anyway, the demand has gone up to a one-for-one, which means in this current year, 2019, excluding agriculture, all our emitters, they have to basically provide 40 million tonnes of offsets, 40 million NZUs. Okay, current price is around $25. That's the cap price. So you do the maths, 40 million times $25. Who went to school? Gav, what's the number? Gav didn't go to school. It's a big number, it's $1 billion. So basically the emitters this year are going to be spending $1 billion buying credits, either from forest owners, or they can go to the government at $25 and just pay them $25 and get a credit back for them. So it gives you some idea how big the ETS, it's a big beast. There's an awful lot of money running around inside it, okay? At the moment we have this price cap of $25. it's going to go in some form in the next year or two. There's going to become an auction system. Now, don't ask me how it's going to work because it's incredibly complex. It's called a cost containment reserve. My personal view is once something gets so complex, people don't really know what's going on, so they make it incredibly complex, so everyone just gets lost and dazed. But there's going to be an auction system coming on in terms of how that price will be set. We don't know. They're going to try and have it going by the end of this year. We don't know, so we're not sure where that's going to go. Like Anita said, beyond 2020 to 2030, the goals we've got to meet. The demand, excluding agriculture, is running at 40 million units. Some of the other changes that are coming in with the ETS, the supply of units going in from the existing post-90 forests. I'll talk about averaging in a minute, try not to confuse you, but there's probably only going to be 4 to 5 million tonnes of carbon credits a year from forests coming into the system. When I went to school, 5 didn't equal 40. So it's going to be a massive shortfall somewhere. And a lot of those forests that are supplying credits under averaging will disappear and are being harvested. So a lot of those forests are going to turn into a negative thing. The carbon's going. Forests will get replanted, but it takes time to regrow. So, there's all these reports like the Productivity Commission come out, and I think this is what spooks a lot of people. They see things like the carbon price is going to go to $150 or $250, et cetera, et cetera. Now that's in a pure economic model of where it's going to go, but this is some of the challenges that the government faces in trying to meet these targets. So what are we going to do? You start putting prices like that on, and things start to change. It's at $25, ag excluded, it's $1 billion a year now. If it goes to $100, we're at $4 billion a year. Now that's a lot of money, and that has an impact on the economy and how people are doing. So it's trying to get that balance of transitioning from what we're doing now to a change, but not upsetting the apple cart, but how do you drive change? So really with an ETS, to be honest, really an ETS is a big stick. You either change or the stick's going to bang you and the price will go up and you'll get banged. So in a very crude sense, that's what it actually is. And they have been proven to work. Price does tend to change people's thoughts and beliefs. Very quickly, I'll keep moving. What's eligible to earn carbon? Like Anita said, it's got to be on bare land that was out at 1990. Now this is very important in terms of just moving specifically to forestry and where it fits in the ETS. What land is eligible to actually earn carbon credits? So if the land was in forest at 1990, and I mean in native forest or exotic forest, it's not actually eligible to actually earn carbon credits. So if you have native forest that's been there for many, many years, you can't actually put that into the ETS, it's not eligible. Now it's the same for forest owners. We've got a lot of forest in New Zealand that's been planted before 1990. There's 600,000 or 700,000 hectares of exotic forest that is not eligible to earn carbon credits. So you guys think you've got a problem. You think we're very happy? And that forest, we're not allowed to change land use out of that forest now in terms of exotic forest. And that applies to farmers as well. And this is catching people out. And it's just a bit of a footnote to be aware of. If you remove more than 2 hectares of pre-90 exotic forest in a 5-year period, you've deforested and you have obligations under the law. You either have to declare that and pay the deforestation charge or replant. If you replant it in forest, no problem. And the penalties are large and big. But to be land to be eligible, it's got to be clear at 1990. It has to be at least 1 hectare in size. In terms of shelter belts, etc., it's got to be 30 metres wide, okay? And it's got to have 30% canopy cover, which is quite an easy rule when you think about it. At maturity, canopy cover only has to be 30% of the ground. So you can, if you're standing above the forest looking down, you will actually be able to see ground through 70% of it. So it's not super dense forest you have to meet to make this. Then the tree species have to be able to reach 5 metres of height at maturity in situ. Now, in terms of a Canterbury situation, especially the plains, this has got effects. I'll just go to my next slide. What's eligible and what's not. So, so in terms of, Sarah was talking about like dairy farming in terms of centre pivots and corners and things in areas like that, potentially that land could be eligible to be put into the ETS, but you've got to meet these rules. Now these rules weren't set by New Zealand, these are international rules. So and they could be harder. New Zealand tried very hard to get the best that we could out of these rules, and I know from talking to people who went to the international negotiations, it could have been a hell of a lot harder than it is. So the problem you do have, and this is the issue, and I know there's a lot of, lot of angst about it. You'll see the riparian planting, it's got to be 30 metres wide. So this is a real problem, you know, when you've got streams and that, and say you've got 5 or 6 metres either side, you don't meet the rules of 30 metres. You've got to have tree species, you've got to get 30% canopy cover. So this is the same when you've got these areas around, say, a centre pivot and corners and things like that. You've got to be able to meet that hectare rule and the width rule in terms of getting it. Now, it's not something that the government's actually done. It's something that's been forced upon New Zealand through international treaties that everyone in the world signed up to. But just very quickly, like I said here, you'll see, you know, the one at the top there, the post 90 with the tick with pine trees, that's pretty obvious. It's, you know, pasture land, clear grassland, planted the trees, eligible land. The old native bush down the bottom there, it's in native forest there, it's not eligible, okay? If it's in native bush at 1990, it's not eligible to earn carbon. Riparian strip, you know, there are ways and means you can fiddle around with that if you can. I don't want to spend time going into it, but you can manipulate these rules a little bit if you know what to do and how to do it. But it's difficult, but it can be done. And this is the problem area we get into, especially in hill country farming, is you get areas that have got a bit of manuka growing it. So for example, where it's got that low manuka growing, if that land was clear at 1990, that's fine. You know, you could actually probably, if you're allowed to, you could clear that and plant exotic trees or let it regenerate to native forests, and it would be eligible to go into the ETS as native or exotic. Non-tree species such as gorse and broom, that country is eligible to go into the ETS once you've planted it, okay? So if you've got a big area of broom, if you clear the broom, you can prove at 1990 it wasn't in trees, it was in broom still. And this is, you know, you become like Sherlock Holmes here trying to prove stuff all the time. It's not easy, I tell you. I had dark hair 10 years ago. But you can actually, that land can be eligible. You can clear it, plant it into exotic trees, or if you want to, you can leave that, it can regenerate into native, and it can be eligible to go into the ETS and earn carbon. It's a matter of proving it. Now, it's very difficult, I can tell you. So, does that, I hope that gives everyone, I haven't got much time, I'm trying to just cover through pretty quickly where it's at. Oh, gee, sorry, wrong button. Now, difficult cases. And this refers more probably to hill country farming, hill country land. There's a lot of land in New Zealand where the subsidies came off in the mid-80s that was clear and started to revert in the late 80s. And unfortunately around 1990, because all the government departments have been closed down in the mid-80s, all the aerial photos stopped getting taken. There's a real gap between about 1985, 86, and then they restart about 93, 94. So you get this land that's got scattered stuff on it now, you look back at 1990, it might have had some scattered stuff in there. Is that eligible or not? It's a really, really difficult process to prove that at 1990 it was not in forest. Was it another land use? Was it still being farmed? And MPI have become very strict about this. It's a real exercise to go actually to the point of having to go around stands and actually cut trees down and age bits of regenerating native, and that's going there to try and prove if it's eligible or not. So all I'm pointing out is a lot of this land that's scrubby and stuff is difficult. Now it's not quite so bad in Canterbury. Matagari, for example, is not a forest species. So if you can prove that it was dark on a map at 1990, but it's been in Matagari, it's not a forest species, okay? And broom, gorse, if you get up into the southern Hawke's Bay, Tawini, things like that, it's not a forest species. But all I'm saying is you can do it, but there's a real process involved in proving it. It's not easy. The ETS is incredibly hard to get into, it's incredibly hard to get out of, but it's not too bad once you're in it. Okay? So this is just one thing, but so a lot of our time is spent doing a lot of analysis, trying to work out, is this land eligible or not, working with MPI for clients, trying to get land that's eligible or not. Okay, so land eligibility is actually the key for forestry getting into the ETS. It's actually proving that the land is eligible. Forget about forest at the moment, you've got to get the land eligibility. Now they're doing a lot of work on this and trying to improve it, but it is hard when you're dealing with someone who lives in a room with no windows in Wellington and is working around it. You know, there's a few choice words go around our office fairly often, I can tell you. Okay, how much carbon do you produce out of growing trees? Now this is just, there's a lot of variability based on growth rates. So, you know, on really high growth sites, you will grow more carbon. If it's dry, hard sites, you'll grow less. Pretty logical, no different to growing grass or crops, you know. Good soil grows good grass, poor soil, no fertiliser or water doesn't grow much. Trees are just another crop, exactly the same. In general rules, exotics are fast, natives are slow. Okay? Exotics are cheaper to establish than natives. If you try and go and plant native trees on a bare bit of site for a start, you're going to be anywhere probably from $8,000 to $14,000 a hectare. Guarantee of success, low. Probability of having to pay more, high. Exotics, probability of success, pretty good, very high. Probability of having to spend more money, pretty low. So that's just a reality of the economic cost of doing things. So this graph here, this is just from a lookup table, which I'm not going to go into detail how we use. But if I walk away, can you hear me? I just want to point at something. But this green line at the top is radiata. So after 35 years, on this lookup table, radiata's produced nearly 1,000 tonnes per hectare of carbon stored. Okay? The red line down here is native. So after 35 years, you're up to about 300 tonnes of carbon per hectare that have been stored. Okay? So it gives you some idea of the quantum of doing that. Now, the native one is based on the lookup table, and I can tell you if you have to measure your native, it'll be lower. The lookup table is very generous for native. Native plants do not store that much carbon per hectare. So it's been pushed up. The radiata pine one at the top is probably low. We've got stands that we've got that by age 35 are putting on anywhere from 12 to 1,400 tonnes of carbon per hectare by age 35. So you get a good site, and what we're finding is even on good sites, even in places like Canterbury, we've got a forest that we're involved with in North Canterbury that are growing as fast and putting on as much carbon as our forests in the North Island are putting on. So carbon doesn't seem to move quite as much as timber yield. It's sort of flattened out yields, but it all comes down to site and what you can do. But as a general rule, exotics will grow a lot more carbon faster and fix a lot of carbon faster than native. So obviously, pretty simple from an economics point of view. You grow more, you grow up faster, the return's better. It's no different to any business growing cattle, sheep, crops, milk, etc., etc. Is Anna here?
No, Anna Gordon.
Anna Gordon, okay. And I thought Anna might be here from MPI Te Rākere, but this is the 1BT, the 1 billion trees funding, just as an example of what's available from that fund. So if you want to, they will fund up to 300 hectares a year of planting. If you're into Indigenous, now that's planting tree species and smaller stuff, etc. You can apply for up to $4,000 per hectare grant. Okay. On erosion-prone land, which there's not a lot in Canterbury, under Forestry we have now what's called a National Environmental Standard for Plantation Forestry. Watch that space, because I'd put a bet on it. By the next year and a half, you guys are going to have one for agriculture too. It's not far away. But anyway, if it zones all our land, we've got a map, we get told what every erosion zone of land in New Zealand is. If it's orange or red, you can apply it to another $500 a hectare. And then there's up fencing, they'll pay up to $500 a hectare, 50% up to $500. And if you add other stuff in it, write it nicely, they'll give you another $2,000 a hectare. Okay? Now, it sounds like a lot of money, but just be aware growing in Indigenous trees and planting native forests, etc. is expensive and it's difficult. It can be done, don't get me wrong, I'm not putting you off it, but just be aware it will cost you more than what's there. If you want to plant, what have I got there next? Yeah, Manuka or Kānuka, there's a lot of Manuka getting planted in the North Island. The grant available there is up to $1,800 per hectare, they'll pay you. Additionally, erosion-prone land, another $500, so it goes to $2,300. No fencing subsidy available for that. Natural regeneration, Indigenous. Now all this simply is saying, right, I'm not going to graze this area anymore. I'm going to just lock it up and let it revert back to native forest. Okay, they will pay you $1,000 a hectare, and the fencing grant again on erosion-prone land they'll add another $500, so you can get $1,500 a hectare, and fencing 50% up to $500 a hectare. Okay, so this is the money that you can apply for. I'll talk about the exotic in a minute. But in terms of those first ones there, in terms of how the money gets paid, that's the other question. They're still being developed at the moment. We're seeing the first grants starting to come through. But generally, it seems to be that they're looking at paying 30% up front on signing of a contract. Some of these Indigenous ones, native ones, regeneration, for example, it might take 3 or 4 years to get the final payments because they want to make sure that it's happening. Okay? Once they see that it's happening and it's achieving it, then they'll pay you the rest of the money then. So yeah, there's a lot of money. there's a lot of money in there, especially for the regeneration one. You've got to have enough moisture and et cetera, and things, and grass control and animal control, et cetera. But if you're living in an area where there's natural forest regeneration coming away, Manuka or whatever, it's an easy option. They'll help pay for the fencing, and if it regenerates, you'll just get paid $1,000 a hectare, basically. Now, exotic, that's basically any exotic trees, radiata, redwoods, et cetera, Douglas fir. The base grant's $1,500 a hectare, a top up of $500 if you're on orange and red zone land. No fencing grants are allowed for that. Okay. So there's a process to apply for that in terms of online. We're doing a lot of applications for people. It takes 2 to 3 months to get through the system and go. There's some quite big, we've got some really big properties that in North Canterbury we're working on now, some really big scale stuff that people are looking at putting in. And this is farmers, this isn't people buying the stuff, this is farmers. There's going to be some large scale forestation go on within farms in this hill country area. It's starting to see. Canterbury's a little bit different. What else can I say about that? Yeah, no, it just takes 2 or 3 months to go through. You can apply for 2 or 3 years at a time. They can carry it over, so you've got time to go and get it done. I'm not sure of the total budget. I can never quite work out what they've put into this. It's anywhere between 120 and $200 million. It's a lot of money. I think the problem's going to be how they get it out the door, actually. So all I'm saying is there's money available. Now, any of those categories that in terms of indigenous planting, Manuka, regeneration, exotic planting, except for radiata, if you get a grant and plant the trees, you can then go and put that straight into the ETS immediately and start earning carbon from it from day one. Radiata pine's got a 6-year stand down, including the year of planting. Okay, so you plant it. So say I planted it this year, 19, 20, 1, 2, 3, 4. In 2025, I can register it into the ETS. Okay, so I've got a stand down period. Don't ask me why, it's just put in. No one likes radiata pine. Don't like things that make you money. So now if you go onto the website, I think it's on the handout there, I'm pretty sure there's the Te Ōrākere website. There's plenty of there's information there. You can go online and find out, and this sort of information's available there as well. But if you are interested in planting and you're on a farm wanting to do it, I'd really highly recommend get in and do it. This is the most, in my 30 plus years in the forest industry, this is the most money I've ever seen put out and thrown out there, and it won't last forever. But if you want to do something, there's a lot of money out there available to help do it. And I see yesterday they announced another fund, I don't know how it's going to work, another $200 million for waterways and riparians and fencing, etc. Don't ask me how that's going to get dished out. I've got no idea. So what I'm saying is there's an awful lot of money out there at the moment for people who want to do stuff and plant stuff. Now I've just put this in very quickly, averaging. I won't go into too much detail. Just to say that there's changes coming in the ETS. I expect probably by July they're going to be out, end of the month. There's going to be amendments to the ETS for forestry, how it works. But at the current time, when you have a forest in the ETS, it's a harvest timber forest, you get up to the top point up here. If you harvest, you have to pay back a lot of carbon, you replant, and you start to earn it again. They're going to look at changing, if you want to stay in for harvesting your trees, into what they call averaging. So you get to about age 18, they'll pay you carbon to age 18. So you plant your trees now for the first 18 years, you'll get carbon credits. It then stops. You then harvest your trees, I'd say 28 or 30 or whatever it is. And when you harvest, you don't have to pay any carbon back. You get to keep all the timber, but your obligation is you have to replant that land back into forest. Okay? And in the second rotation, you receive no more carbon. So it's one off. Now that forest, so basically you're going into sort of like a permanent forest system. So carbon's there for the first 18 or so years. And after that, what happens is the Crown actually takes responsibility for managing all the carbon flows and the averaging up and down. Now what that's doing is trying to take the liability issues out of the whole thing, because what they're also proposing, we're waiting to see if this comes through, is that if say your trees get to 10 years old or 20 years old, and they burn down or vaporise for some reason, at the moment you have to pay all the carbon back that you've received. What the proposal under this is you won't have to pay any carbon back, you just have to replant the forest and grow it again. So, and that's actually a really big change that's coming in terms of liability. And I really like it because I'm not going to have to pay insurance companies so much money. I pay them far too much anyway. So just in terms of what effect does carbon have on this? Well, obviously you've got you're looking at anywhere probably from 500 to 700 tonnes of carbon in the first 18 years, which offsets a lot of costs and is a lot of income. You've got to remember though, that past the first rotation, you're simply back in the timber business. That's what you're in, the timber business. And I'll come on to permanent forest in a minute. But just as an example, carbon lifts the internal rate of return by 4 to 6%. So this is just a Canterbury example. Land at around 4k a hectare. Timber only is running at about 5.7% rate of return, which is still a pretty good return. There's a lot of good money in timber. And people are really concentrating in terms of forestry on the carbon at the moment, and no one talks about timber. There was a forest estate sold down on Otago last year, 3,000 hectares of forest, and it wasn't mature. It was from cut over right through to older stuff, just an average age of forest. No carbon involved, 3,000 hectares, went for over $83 million. Just under 30,000 a hectare. There's a lot of money in timber. We're harvesting stuff in Hawke's Bay for people aged 24, and they're making over $50,000 a hectare in the hand from timber. $2,000 a hectare a year plus they're making on timber. So it's not a story just about carbon. So you can see the return there, 5 or 6%, 9 or 10%. So half is timber, half is carbon. But you've got to remember, after your first rotation, you're going to be straight back to carbon. Okay, that's it.
Straight back to timber.
Pardon?
Straight back to timber, not carbon.
Yeah, straight back to timber. No carbon in the second rotation loss. So yeah. So basically, if you're going to grow commercial forestry, put it into the ETS, you'll get some carbon for the first 18 or 20 years. It stops. When you harvest, you don't have to pay anything back, but you have to put that land back into trees again afterwards. What the rule is going to be about what trees you have to put it into, etc., we don't know yet. I don't know, but that's the general theory how it's going to work. Now, permanent forests, at the moment there's a PFSI, there's a new category come out on permanent forests, and again, Warwick can talk about this because he's involved in more of this stuff, but basically where you plant a forest and you're in it for carbon. It's proposed to be a 50-year agreement. You've got to leave the land and trees for 50 years and you keep earning carbon through the whole life cycle of the forest as it gets up to age 50. At age 50, they're proposing to have choices. You can remove yourself completely from the ETS, pay back all the carbon you've got. You can go to averaging. If it's, say, a radiata forest, you get to keep the first 18 years, pay the rest back, or you sign up for another 50 years and just sail on to the sunset. So it's permanent forest. And that can be an indigenous and it can be an exotic, whatever you wish. Now again, I've put this here because this is really important. If your forest grows up to a point, gets burnt down or destroyed, under the current regime, you have to pay all your credits back. Under the proposed new regime, you don't have to pay it. You have to replant it. You won't get any carbon for the first 20 years, so it burned down there, and then you get some after that. So yeah, again, it's a big overhead cost of risk and liability going in terms of permanent forest where it's going. Now, under the permanent forest, there will be rules about harvesting proposed that you are allowed to do some sort of harvesting. It's basically you've got to leave 30% canopy cover, so it's not clear fell. It's very much a European style forestry system where you have to production thin, etc., etc. But again, we wait to see rules on that. But that, for some people in some areas and properties in terms of indigenous and even some exotic on places which are not going to be viable to plant for timber production, this is an option for people to look at where it's going. So in conclusion, like Anita said, there's major momentum around this stuff now with the Zero Carbon Amendment Bill, the Paris Agreement, the 1BT and a lot of other stuff coming out. So it's good for trees in terms of there's money being made. There's a lot of money out there to help plant trees and a lot of money to be made from trees. The NZU price is high at the moment. It's around $25. Where it's going to go to, how it's going to go there, I have no idea. But like Anita had on her graphs there, if we're going to achieve these targets, because the reason for the ETS is to achieve the targets. It's to do that, we're going to have to, like I said, the ETS really is a stick, forcing people to change. So logically, unless things change very quickly, the price is going to have to go up somewhere along the line, somewhere. And logically also, if you think about it from an economic point of view, if we do achieve zero carbon emissions by 2050, what we want, there is no need for carbon offsets anymore. So logically, long term, if we achieve it, the price of carbon is zero one day. It's simply a tool